Okay, great. So welcome everyone. I'm Jen Kramer, and I am here to talk to you tonight about Bootstrap. How many of you know what Bootstrap is? Wonderful. Why are you here? Hopefully I'll tell you something new that you don't know. My background, I've been doing website design and development for 15 years. I originally worked as a freelancer and then ran my own firm for several years. And in 2012, I had an epiphany and realized that what I really loved doing was teaching. So I traded in my whiny clients for my whiny students. I moved here to the Boston area and I started teaching at Harvard Extension School. And I make videos for lynda.com. I have 24 titles at lynda.com. So I'm here to tell you just a little bit about Bootstrap. We're not going to go into a lot of code, but just sort of at a high level, some things you ought to know about Bootstrap. So by now, you should know that it's all about mobile, right? This is one of my favorite set of pictures in the world. So the top frame here is the funeral procession of Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square in Rome. And the bottom frame is when Pope Francis was announced as the new Pope in St. Peter's Square in Rome. So in 8 years, the world has entirely changed. And I think these two pictures just tell the entire story. Yeah, isn't that phenomenal? And
I suddenly realized what those were.
Yeah. Those could also be weddings, I think, in 2013 and later. That's what your wedding guests do. But anyway, there's a link down here for the photo backstory. My slides are up on slideshare.net if you would like to download these and take a look at the links later. So, all right, we need to start thinking about mobile. So let's talk about the two big approaches to building mobile-based websites. So we could build a separate mobile-based website. Maybe we have a common database kind of thing, and we have two themes. We have the desktop theme and we have the mobile theme, right? So separate mobile websites. That's one approach. Or we could even have an app or both. And the other one is responsive design. Anybody know what responsive design is? Okay, so responsive design is, I'll define it on the next couple of slides. So which is better? Responsive design?
Yeah, responsive design is where the thing shrinks and...
Yeah, where one code base and it adapts to the screen size.
And the other one is where you tailor make for different senses what...
Exactly. So you have actually a separate mobile look versus the desktop look. So which is better?
I like both.
You like both?
It depends.
It depends. This is your $1 million consulting phrase. Just remember Velociraptor. It always depends. If you look very thoughtfully in these meetings and say, it depends, then everyone will think you're a very intelligent person. So it depends. And I've given you a link here for reading up on a comparison of methods for building mobile optimized websites. You may very well actually want to go with a separate mobile website, depending on what you're doing and the context in which it's being used, which is a whole talk in by itself. But tonight we're going to focus on responsive design. So responsive design. Just for a quick review, responsive design is defined by 3 characteristics. Does anyone know what those 3 characteristics are?
Response to the viewport size.
Response to the viewport size, but how? Media queries, that's one of the 3. 2 others? Anybody? You're all too hungry to think about it. Okay. Well, 3 things. So a flexible grid-based layout. Grid-based layouts aren't necessarily responsive by themselves. Take a look at the 960 grid system as an example. Media queries make those grid systems responsive, and you'll also need images that resize. And we're not just talking about posting that honking big picture from your digital camera and shrinking it up to the screen, right? That's a big fashion no. All right. So this technique was originally defined by Ethan Marcotte back in May of 2010. There was an article at A List Apart that described the technique. We love Ethan Marcotte. He's a local man. Okay, so let's talk about what each of these things mean. So a grid-based layout. What we're going to think about here is that we're going to divide our web page up into some number of columns. 12 is a very common number. 16 is common, 24 is common, but some number of columns. And then what we're going to do is we'll group those columns into units to achieve whatever type of layout we want to achieve for our web page. So we think about, a 25% left column and a 75% right column, or 3 evenly sized columns across the top, or 2 columns that are evenly sized. You can combine any sorts of those things. So that's the grid-based layout. And we have images that resize. So what do we mean by images that resize? They should change based on screen resolution, right? The big honkin' picture you load on your desktop display is probably not the one you want to load on your phone, yes? Even here in Boston, where most of us have 4G. Anybody ever been out in the country where you only had 3G? I ran my business on dial-up for 4 years. I have sympathy for people, okay? So you can load that one big image, right, and just scale it down with HTML parameters. Not good, right? Right, okay. You can do it, but you shouldn't. You can do something server-side. Hey, you're a PHP group. You should love server-side, right? So let the server choose and serve up the correct size image. That's a great solution. If you know PHP, that's a wonderful solution to use. You can also do some things client-side. So rather than loading the one big honkin' image, let's line up a bunch of image tags. We'll have the big, the medium, and the small. And then we'll play around with CSS parameters to hide or show some of those images, depending on resolution. Like use media query, to turn those on and off, or JavaScript. What do you think? Good or bad? Don't. Okay, so why? Why is it bad?
No advantage over the first method.
I'm sorry?
There's no advantage over the first method.
There's no advantage over the first method. Which is true because in the first method you had one big picture. Now what have you got loading? 3 pictures. That's even worse than the first method. Even if display is set to none with the CSS, 3 images are still going to load. Okay? And then finally, client side. You can let JavaScript actually decide what image should be loaded and have that pull it over from the server. And if you're working with Foundation, which is a competitor of Bootstrap, that actually comes with Foundation. There's a JavaScript widget built into Foundation that will allow you to manage your images client-side. Unfortunately, Bootstrap comes with none of these. So you'll have to roll your own, as they say. All right. And the last part's media queries. Media queries are CSS entirely. The browser is reporting the screen resolution. And based on the current width, in this specific instance, the current width of the screen resolution, you'll serve a style sheet with a layout for that width. Okay? So if it's a big one, then you'll load the big styles. If it's a little one, you load the little styles. The key here is there's no JavaScript. No JavaScript involved with media queries. This is entirely a CSS standard. Okay? Media queries actually do more than just this. We always think of media queries as doing this. And can anybody else think of something else that media queries do? They're incredibly cool things.
Print versus screen?
Yeah, you can do print versus screen with media queries. We used to do this as separate style sheets, but now we can do these through media queries. Another one that's incredibly cool, portrait versus landscape, also can be done with a media query. Okay, so Bootstrap itself, what is that? Well, it's a responsive design framework for building websites and web applications. That's if you ask Bootstrap. That's how they define themselves. All right, and they are the #1 most popular project on GitHub by far and away. They had 73,000 stars in June of 2014. That's a lot of stars. And 27,000 forks. That's an awful lot of forks. So it's a huge project, and people love it, and they're doing all kinds of stuff with it. Okay, and there's Wikipedia. You can go read more. What comes with Bootstrap 3? A whole bunch of stuff. So first of all, that fully functional grid system with 4 different breakpoints to it. So it can work with a really big screen, a slightly smaller screen, an even smaller screen, and then the tiniest screens of all. 4 different sizes for that grid system. The base CSS has all kinds of wonderful stuff styled for you. PHP developers rejoice. You don't have to deal with all that CSS nonsense anymore. It's all done for you, and it looks good, and your designer will not make fun of you. Well, they make fun of you because you use Bootstrap, and they'll say it looks like Bootstrap. But it's different than how they normally make fun of you, right? Hamburger menus, yes. And you can go, yes, I have a hamburger menu. It's right here in my Bootstrap. I'll show you. Yeah, it is true. It is true. Yes. Okay, so you can customize your CSS either through conventional methods or you can use less CSS or Sass. Anybody ever heard of these technologies? Less CSS and Sass? Those are what? CSS preprocessors. Bootstrap was originally written with less. There's a Sass version now. It's a port, a direct port of the less files. There's also a bunch of stuff that's written in jQuery. Drop-down menus, tooltips, alerts, carousels, blah, blah, blah. Everything you want. It's all in there somewhere. All written for you and debugged. There's also an optional icon font. You can incorporate it or not. It has 180 cute little pictures. Because it's a font, those are vector graphics, and so you can scale them to be as big or as small as you want, change their color, add a drop shadow, add rounded corners, all kinds of wonderful things. And it's distributed under the MIT license. That's new. The current version of Bootstrap is 3.3.2. So just recently it switched from the Apache 2.0 license to MIT. I mention this because some people find this very important. Okay. In terms of competitors, there's Bootstrap and a link to their website. Here's the foundation. So foundation.zurb.com. In general, the difference between these two fully responsive design frameworks, Bootstrap's the #1 most popular, far and away. Foundation, a distant second, but a really solid product. If you're a graphic designer and you have a lot of front-end web design skills, you may like Foundation better because it has less styling in it. I know that sounds weird. It comes with less stuff. But less stuff means what? Less to override, right? Okay, so it may actually be more efficient for you to work with Foundation if you're a designer already. If you're a PHP guy and you love the back end, stick with Bootstrap. And if that's not enough for you, here's a link to 22 more CSS frameworks that you can take a look at. You'll find one you love. Who's using it? Lots of people are using it. It's actually baked into Joomla. Joomla is an open source content management system, the #2 most popular open source content management system in the world. There's also some links to some websites where you can go see examples of sites built with Bootstrap and some big names like the whole state of Kentucky. They use Bootstrap. Medicare.gov, Discus, places you have heard of. Okay, a little bit about their creation story. So, because it's fun. So this project was started by Mark Otto and Jacob Thornton when they were working at Twitter as an internal tool. It's interesting to note that Mark Otto used to work at Zurb. Zurb is the place that made Foundation. These two people are not friendly groups, let's just say. Otto and Thornton released Bootstrap in 2011 because it was so useful as this internal tool at Twitter. They said, what the heck, let's go ahead and throw it on out there in the great wide world and see what happens. And at the same time, the guys at Zurb said, hey, if they could do it, we can do it. So they threw theirs out there at the same time. And then Mark Otto and Jacob Thornton left Twitter in 2012. Mark Otto is now at GitHub. I'm not sure where Jacob Thornton is working. But Mark Otto is now he's mostly in charge of the open source project. He adds core team members. They're doing all kinds of stuff. The next version of Bootstrap is version 4. They've been promising it since October last year. It's due real soon now. Any day now, it'll be out. So what exactly comes with Bootstrap? You get 3 folders. So if you go to the Bootstrap website, you click download the default configuration, you'll get 3 folders. One for CSS, one for fonts, one for JavaScript. Inside of these, inside of the CSS folder, you'll find minified versions and human-readable versions of files, so 2 pairs of 2 each. The bootstrap.min.css and bootstrap.css is the basic styling for everything, which is now flat design. You guys all know what flat design means? Okay, so flat design is the new trend. That's like no more drop shadows, no more rounded corners, simple, clean. The moment that all that stuff was okay to use in CSS, the designers decided it wasn't cool anymore. Do you know how many hours I wasted on those stupid little images for rounded corners through the years? Oh my gosh, I want those years back. Anyway, if you love those drop shadows, gradients, rounded corners, which was in Bootstrap 2, you can still have them. They're here in bootstrap-theme.css. So you can link to this as well. But Paul Irish, who works for Google and is the Chrome guy and is the speed guy, will tell you that Bootstrap runs 50% faster. Bootstrap 3 runs 50% faster than Bootstrap 2 did. And it's because they got rid of the gradients, the rounded corners, the drop shadows, and so forth, and went with flat design. The fonts folder comes with 4 fonts. They're all exactly the same. They just have different extensions on them. So depending on what browser is being used, the correct font will be called. And then in the JavaScript folder, there's the JavaScript that is human readable and the minified version of it. And you'll also need to download and link to a copy of jQuery. Not necessarily download, but you have to at least link to a copy of jQuery, the version 1 series of jQuery, in order for Bootstrap to work correctly. So that's what you get out of the box. That's it. So some CSS, some fonts, and some JavaScript. And then if you write the HTML according to the recipes, all of this stuff just will magically work. Okay, browser support. There's this lovely little chart that I copied right off their website. But all you really care about is Internet Explorer, right? Okay, so Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer 9 through 11, no problem. IE 8, you need to hook to something called respond.js. Anybody ever worked with that before, familiar with it? It provides some backwards compatibility with some of the responsive design aspects as well as HTML5 tags. And so everything else, you know, it pretty much supports. It's all good. So aren't you guys like so glad that Internet Explorer is on the decline?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Something else that like has taken years of my life. You know what else is down in this country? The US murder rate.
Is this related to the frustration with Internet Explorer?
Oh, yes. Yes. I was a biology undergraduate major, and one of my professors told me if it graphs, graph it. So, you know, there you go. I wish I could take credit for that. I found that on the internet. I think that's hysterical. Anyway. Okay, so accessibility. Something else that might be very important, particularly to some of you, especially those with government contracts, universities and colleges. They have improved some accessibility with Bootstrap. It is one of the differentiators between Bootstrap and Foundation. So if you know about ARIA codes and screen reader only styles, these are baked into Bootstrap as well. So there are some level of accessibility that's there that goes beyond just writing clean HTML and clean CSS and well-structured and well-formed code. There's some additional improvements that are layered on top of that. And a lot of that's been driven by Joomla. Joomla has a big commitment to accessibility. And when they incorporated Bootstrap into the core, they worked with the Bootstrap project to make sure that they were not losing accessibility when they incorporated that. Okay. The grid systems. So the 4 grid systems, as I said, there's a small, medium, large grid system. So in this case, you'd have a series of columns, however many there are, however many you code. And when you hit the breakpoint at the media query, those grids that are next to each other will then stack on top of each other. Make sense? So you go from this to this. The extra small will always stay horizontal. So if the screen's this big, your columns are next to each other. If the screen's this big, your columns are still next to each other. It actually never wraps. Make sense? Okay, so this is a mobile-first type of approach, and that's the point of putting this together that way. Here's some pretty pictures that show you all kinds of styling. Isn't that cool? It comes with fun colors. They all kind of match. Lots of blue. Okay, so lots of things that are styled. Forms, icons, drop-downs, tooltips, highlights, all kinds of wonderful things. A little bit about the CSS preprocessing. So less CSS is the primary CSS preprocessor. That's what they wrote the Bootstrap with from the beginning. Back in all that time ago in 2011, it was like forever ago. Less and Sash were essentially the same. Less is JavaScript-based for its compiler. Sass was Ruby-based at that point in time, exclusively at that point in time. And these guys were JavaScript guys. They said, well, we're going to work with Less. We know JavaScript. And as time has evolved, Less is kind of like, I think it would be completely dead if it wasn't for Bootstrap, honestly. because Sass has kind of won this fight. So they have started with a port. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of less documentation. You'll just kind of have to go read the code and figure it out, which is a shortcoming, I think. But there's also less of an expectation that you'll work with CSS preprocessors like less. The expectation with Bootstrap is you're going to work with it pretty much styled right out of the box, as opposed to making a huge number of customizations, which is true for Foundation. Foundation expects you to customize it. So there's this direct Sass port. OK. All kinds of JavaScripty goodness in Bootstrap as well. We have lovely drop-downs. We have cool tooltips. We've got accordion panels. We've got alert boxes of various kinds of others. Here's your required carousel, required by law, I believe, at this point in time. So that is available as well. Any JavaScript fans in the audience tonight? You can admit it. That's all right. You can love JavaScript and PHP. Any of you JavaScript fans, do you like semicolons? Yeah? OK. Well, I like them too. And this is just this is not intended to show you any kind of code whatsoever. It's supposed to show you that there are no semicolons in their JavaScript. Oh, yeah, it's kind of weird. But that's the way they write it. There's no semicolons in their JavaScript. I didn't know you could do that. OK. It can be a problem, by the way. Some people will refuse to use Bootstrap for that reason. So when is Bootstrap awesome? So you want to build a responsive website very quickly. You want to put something together really, really fast. You want it to look good. You're a PHP developer. You don't want to mess with the front end. You're tired of getting made fun of for writing crappy-looking front ends. Bootstrap's a great way to get around all those problems. You need all that styling right out of the box. You're a less CSS fan. You're not so much into the Sass thing. If you like less CSS, Bootstrap is one of your only options. You really like open source. Bootstrap's a great open source project. They don't have a company behind them anymore. They're no longer affiliated with Twitter. Fully open source project with all of the things we love about open source projects and the things we hate about open source projects. And you really hate semicolons in your JavaScript, then this is the project for you. So that's pretty much it. That's a little bit about Bootstrap in a nutshell. Can I take any questions? Yes?
Is it big files to download?
Are they big files to download? Big files. How would you define big files?
Take a long time.
Yes. Can you give me a measurement in K or megabytes?
Oh, what size are they?
Yeah. What size? What size do you consider big? You don't. OK. So I believe they're around 100, 125K for the CSS, the minified CSS file, with everything fully loaded. It is possible to customize Bootstrap. They have a customization screen. So for example, if you're not going to use the image carousel, you're not going to use the tooltips, you're not going to use table styling, you can leave all of that out to reduce your file sizes. But fully loaded, with everything included, it's about 125K for the CSS file. Some people feel that that's very large. Okay? Yes?
Is there a different look that each one is known for?
A different look for each responsive design framework? Yes, there is definitely a Bootstrap look. And that Bootstrap look would be the one from the Bootstrap website. And it would be this kind of thing, this is called the Jumbotron. Okay, I understand these are required by law, usually with a carousel in them. It's kind of the way we build websites these days. Little boxes down here underneath, right? Okay, so if you start looking at these kinds of websites and they look a little formulaic to you, there's a reason for that. Bootstrap standardized a lot of this stuff and made it very accessible and easy to code. So look at the Bootstrap website, look at some of the Bootstrap Expo and some of the other galleries, and they'll give you a sense of the Bootstrap style. Now, what happens is because Bootstrap is so loved by people who don't know CSS, all of these websites start to take on the same kind of look to them. You can dig into the less or the Sass, and you can make it look however you want. It doesn't have to look like Bootstrap, but it frequently does because people want to use Bootstrap because they don't want to write CSS. Okay. Other questions?
I've just started working with Bootstrap.
Yeah.
I'm trying to override things because the contrast isn't enough to satisfy accessibility.
Ah, okay.
So that's where, I guess there's something new that you can add on that'll do more of that for you so you're not doing all.
Okay, so the question has to do with contrast and accessibility, and that the contrast isn't high enough in Bootstrap out of the box. So presumably you'll want to pick your own color scheme anyway for Bootstrap. So if you run your own color scheme through whatever tool you're using to make sure that there is enough contrast there to meet accessibility requirements, then the less or the Sass files are very simple. You can just plug in the variables. There's color names for the variables, and you can just plug in your color names, and poof, it should be fixed. It's really very simple to do. Yes?
Could you just use the grid without all the other styling?
Yes, you could use just the grid without all the styling and everything else. Here under the Customize screen, so this is getbootstrap.com. And if you come to the Customize link that's up here in the navigation, just to show you what you can customize. So you can, this is the shortest list of all. Are you going to use, what JavaScript are you going to use? What kind of big component-y things like nav bars and Jumbotron, thumbnails and that sort of thing. Styling for basic things like tables or forms and whatnot. And then they get specific further on down the page here. There's the jQuery plugins, and then here's all the less variables. You can actually customize them right from this screen. So you can type in those colors, whatever colors it is that you want to do, and it'll compile it for you and give you a custom download right here from this screen. It'll also give you a JSON file with whatever it is that you typed in here for values. So later, as you go to the next version of Bootstrap, all of those changes that you made are saved. Very important. Because when you download the next version, you're going to lose those changes. Okay. Is the pizza here yet? No. Okay. Yes?
I've used some templates on Bootstrap before, and I'm wondering if you wanted to just have like a news section be your blog, but mainly you're using the great, templates on Bootstrap. How do you get that blog, running with Bootstrap?
So how would you get a blog up and running with Bootstrap? What kind of blog software are you using?
That's the question.
That's the question. What blog software should you use? No, Bootstrap itself is just front-end stuff. It's just CSS and JavaScript with HTML written. It's expected that you'll write HTML according to a certain pattern to make all that stuff run. So WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, all of them have some kind of starter theme with Bootstrap integrated into it. So you can write your own theme for that kind of thing, or some kind of starter theme.
So would you use Bootstrap and WordPress?
Yes, you would use Bootstrap and WordPress. So WordPress would be your blog software. Bootstrap would be the look.
And can you just pick your theme or style it all with Bootstrap and then add in WordPress, or should you consider the WordPress theme?
Well, so what WordPress is going to do is it's going to provide you that blog functionality. It'll give you the login. It'll give you the ability to make posts. So you would probably start with throwing a few posts in, maybe a couple of pages of background information, and then you're going to layer the theme on top. So that's where the Bootstrap part would come in. So how is your blog going to look? Make sense? It's backwards from how we normally do it, right? With a static website, you normally think about the look first, and then you just sort of plop the content in. With content management systems, you start with the content, because you have to have something to style, and then layer the theme on top. We can talk later if you want. Okay. Cool. Other questions? Yes?
So, I'm using Bootstrap less, but there's a bunch of programs that compile it
Yes.
and move stuff. Can you talk a little about workflow?
Sure.
I'm never sure where, because you only end up with one unified CSS file.
Yep. So the question has to do with workflow and compiling preprocessors. So what I normally teach with is something called prepros. It's a GUI that you just download and it runs on your desktop, and it's really straightforward and simple to use. People that like something a little bit heavier lifting, that might do a little bit more, like minify and FTP to the server and gosh knows what all, would use things like Grunt or Gulp.js. So those can be integrated for compiling your less or your Sass and whatever else you want to have happen as part of your workflow. So those are certainly there. And then, of course, there's Mac-specific compilers or Windows-specific compilers. But as an educator, my criteria is always, it has to work on Mac and Windows, it has to be free, and it has to be easy to use, which is why I normally teach with prepros. Prepros. Yep. Other questions? We have pizza? Not yet? It's still on the bridge. Oh my. Oh, okay, we got more questions. Yes.
So what does the CSS look like? Are the selectors all too deep or
Too deep. Do the selectors get too deep? How did you define too deep?
Number 2, not TOO?
Okay, number 2.
Like class and subclass. Is that as bad as it gets, or do they get nasty?
Yes.
Like
So
5 deep is nasty.
Okay, 5 deep. 5 individual items in the selector. Yes, they can get quite deep. And they're using not just classes, but they're also using HTML tags. They're using like siblings, adjacent siblings. They're using nth child. They're using attribute selectors. They're using all kinds of wild and wonderful CSS3 selectors in their CSS. Yeah. But fortunately, a lot of it's in the variables file. So if you don't like their blue and you want to switch it out for your red, you just go in the variables file, you change out the hex value, you compile, and you're done. Other questions? Matt says good. Oh, we got one more. Yes.
So if you're working with Bootstraps and you have the contacts page laid out, this is sort of similar to my other question, is that then you need to go and find or write your own PHP file in order to get that contact page working. So it's a little different than WordPress, which is more.
Yeah, okay. So the question is about a contact page. So yes, generally speaking, if you create a form, you need to hook it up to some kind of action to make it do something. So that can be done with PHP, and at some point in this 200 days of code, I'm sure you're going to learn about how to hook up forms and collect data. WordPress should do that for you out of the box. So it'll have a form of some kind that's probably going to email the results of the form to whomever it is that you specify. So you don't actually have to write that, which is kind of nice. Yeah, because it also keeps up with the security. No, Bootstrap's all about how it looks. It's not about how it functions. So Bootstrap can make your form fields look pretty, but it's not going to be about how the form is functioning. That's the PHP side of things or the WordPress side of things. Okay? Cool. Yes?
What do you recommend for dealing with the images that Bootstrap isn't going to help you out with? Is there,
Yeah, so images for Bootstrap, you guys are PHP people, so, whatever you do on your server side, whoosy whatsits, you can do that. For front-end developers like me who don't, I write PHP includes, and that's the limit of what I do with PHP. Picture fill is a wonderful, I think this is a really good responsive image polyfill. So what's happening with responsive images these days is there is a new spec that's coming out in HTML. And let me scroll on down to that code here. There we go. And I'll make it bigger so we can actually see it. All right. So this is a new spec that's coming our way in the HTML land. So this is going to take the place of the regular old image tag. It's the picture tag. Okay? And so the picture tag is going to take a number of arguments that go with this. And these are sources, source lines. If you think about audio and video in HTML5, it takes the same sort of format. So in audio and video in HTML5, you might have several different sources, one for MP4 and one for OGG files, and it depends on what your browser is supporting for those video and audio files. So here what you're going to do is the source tag, you can point to different sizes of images, and then you can combine these with a media query right here in your HTML tag. And so then the browser will know, based on the media query and these image sources, which size image to pull in. Now, the problem with the picture tag, of course, is that it's not supported by a whole lot of browsers yet. So that's where this JavaScript comes in. So this is picture fill. I'll scroll back up to the top of the page. There they are, picture fill. And picture fill is the JavaScript that will make your browser aware of the picture element and how to treat it. And so I like it for this reason, because it's future forward. We're going towards the picture element anyway. So this is a nice JavaScript way of bringing in the correct size images. Yep, absolutely. Server side works too, though. No problem.
All right.
All right.
Nice work.
Great.
Give her a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.